Trump is like previous American presidents when it comes to foreign policy, brutal and dangerous. However, what is different now is that the world has changed. This is not the world that Trump was dealing with during his first term. The United States is much weaker thanks to the rising tensions with China, the war in Ukraine, and of course the destruction of Western soft power, US soft power, because of their support for the Holocaust in Gaza, as well as the extraordinarily brutal airstrikes against civilians in Lebanon.
And so today we're going to start with the Iranian perspective. And to help us unpack that, we're very pleased to welcome a longtime friend of the program, Tehran University professor Seyed Mohammed Marandi. Professor Marandi, thank you so much for joining the program again today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I want to start with a historical introspective, because arguably Trump was, during his first term, the most anti-Iranian president in U.S. history. He pulled out of the nuclear deal. He imposed sweeping sanctions on Iran. And of course, he assassinated legendary commander Qasem Soleimani. What does Iran expect from Trump 2.0?
First, we have to remember that the maximum pressure sanctions were initiated by Obama. After the nuclear deal in 2015, Obama was supposed to remove those sanctions, but he betrayed the deal. He lied to Iran, and he only removed some of the sanctions, whereas the Iranians were committed to their side of the bargain. And then when Trump came, he revived the maximum pressure sanctions and intensified it. But we also have to remember that after Trump left, Biden maintained the maximum pressure sanctions and even added more to the list. So it isn't as if under Biden policy towards Iran has changed. The maximum pressure sanctions are in place as we speak. And the United States, as we speak, continues to add more people and companies to the list of sanctioned entities. Many of them have already been sanctioned, but they're sanctioned again and again, mostly for psychological warfare. The other issue is that Trump was a continuation. His policies were a continuation of previous policies. Obama initiated the dirty war in Syria, and he and his regional allies, Mr. Erdogan, Abdullah in Jordan, and the oil-rich Arab dictatorships, along with Israel, they were supporting Al-Qaeda and ISIS and the other extremist groups across Syria to bring down the government. When Trump came to power, he continued the same policy. And he even bombed Syria like Obama. But what happened was that after the resistance alongside the Syrian government, Iran and Russia together began defeating the extremists, Trump changed his policy and suddenly turned against ISIS in order to carry out a land grab, because he was afraid that the Syrian government would capture all of its own territory, regain its sovereignty. So he began to, and the US armed forces and their local proxies began to strike ISIS so that they can gain territory. And that's why the United States right now occupies 1/3 of Syria. The murder of General Soleimani, who was the person who led the fight against ISIS and Al-Qaeda across the region in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Iraq, was also a dark stain on American foreign policy. General Soleimani was actually murdered when he was on his way to meet the Iraqi prime minister to discuss the easing of tensions with Saudi Arabia. The Saudis had sent a letter to the Iraqi prime minister at that time Miss Dr. Adel Abdul Mahdi, and Dr. Adel Abdul Mahdi was supposed to meet General Soleimani 8 in the morning, but the Americans killed him before the meeting. And I think it's very clear that one of the reasons why General Soleimani was murdered was because the Americans wanted to prevent rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So all of this shows that Trump is like previous American presidents when it comes to foreign policy, brutal and dangerous. However, what is different now is that the world has changed. This is not the world that Trump was dealing with during his first term. The United States is much weaker, thanks to the rising tensions with China, the war in Ukraine, and of course, the destruction of Western soft power, US soft power, because of their support for the Holocaust in Gaza, as well as the extraordinarily brutal airstrikes against civilians in Lebanon. So he is leading an America, or who is going to lead an America, which is in a much more difficult situation, a lot of internal strife, major economic difficulties, and perhaps crises during the months ahead. And therefore, I think if he is going to be serious about what he calls making America great again, he is going to have to decrease U.S. commitments abroad. He is going to have to end the endless wars. And I think these are things that his supporters are expecting from him. So it will be very difficult for him to get into any major conflict in our part of the world, especially now that Iran and the axis of resistance are so much more powerful than they were years ago.
I think your point about the continuity between Obama, Trump, and Biden is very interesting, in particular when you consider the narrative that was dominating this election, because a lot of pundits, a lot of so-called experts were insisting that Iran preferred Kamala Harris and the Democrats. And you even saw these sort of wild accusations that the Iranians were trying to wage a covert information campaign on behalf of the Democrats, that they were trying to assassinate Trump, so on and so forth. So could you address this widespread perception that Iran viewed Kamala Harris as the lesser of two evils?
That is absolutely false. What Biden and Kamala Harris did to the Palestinian people and the people of Gaza in particular, and what they're doing also now in Lebanon, because we have to remember that they are providing the weapons and the ammunition and the funding and the political cover and the media cover for the atrocities, for the genocide, for the Holocaust. This is unforgivable, and this is unprecedented. What the United States has done in the region over the past year is extraordinary. They are carrying out a Holocaust with the Israeli regime in front of the world, and they're carrying out the genocidal airstrikes on Lebanon every day alongside the Israelis, because it's their weaponry, it's their ammunition. They're doing this in front of the world. And in fact, what is most extraordinary is how in Lebanon, the Western media is actually present, and Western embassies are actually present in Beirut. But there is a conspiracy of silence so that the Israeli regime can slaughter families across Lebanon in order to put pressure against the resistance. This is unforgivable for the Iranians. So no president in the past 40-some years has ever done what Biden and, of course, Kamala Harris have done to the people of this region. And therefore, there's no sympathy for these two actors, for these two American leaders. And I think that anyone who believes that the Iranians prefer them simply does not know what's going on in this part of the world and does not understand Tehran.
I think you make a very compelling point that it's difficult to imagine things getting far worse than they are right now. But let me play devil's advocate, right? Because when you look at Trump, there's been a lot of speculation about whether he will start war against Iran. And admittedly, we have mixed signals on this because during his first term, Trump reportedly overruled his generals and called off a planned airstrike against Iran. And this time around on the campaign trail, he explicitly said that he doesn't want war with Iran. But at the same time, when you look at what people in Israel are hoping, they're hoping that Trump will greenlight a far more aggressive approach against Iran, including strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities and critical infrastructure. What do you expect in this regard? Do you think Trump will be the president to make the historic error of going to war against Iran?
No one can make predictions. The United States is a very dangerous country. It has always been a very dangerous regime. It has made many threats against Iran under different presidents. And that is why the Iranians have, over the past 2-3 decades, began preparing themselves for potential conflict with the United States. Iran has underground drone and missile cities across the country, and they're designed to destroy American assets across the region and to destroy those regimes that host the Americans or the American military in the region. That is Iran's deterrence. So if there's a conflict between the United States and Iran, whether it's under Biden or Trump, then you can be sure that all American bases in the Persian Gulf region will be destroyed. The Americans will be kicked out of Iraq and, of course, Syria. And those regimes, those oil and gas-rich regimes and dictatorships in the Persian Gulf region will come to an end. And that will create a global economic crisis that is unprecedented. Probably the 1929 US depression would pale in comparison. So it really doesn't matter who's president. The Iranians have prepared themselves for such a scenario. There is a balance of terror between Iran and the United States. And I think Trump knows this. After he murdered General Soleimani, the Iranians said they're going to retaliate. And he said if Iran retaliates, that he will strike Iran. Iran struck a US base, destroying the base, and he didn't retaliate because I think he understood that the US armed forces was powerless to block Iranian missiles and that the Iranians were quite capable of destroying the US presence in the region. So from my understanding, he understood that this balance of terror exists.
You know, I'm sure that a lot of our viewers are Trump optimists, and I try to keep an open mind. But I do want to point to a recent data point that gives some reason for pessimism about Trump. A couple hours ago, we received news that the person leading the Trump transition team in the State Department is none other than neocon Brian Hook. And for our viewers, some important context, Brian Hook was basically the architect of Trump's maximum pressure strategy against Iran. He was the guy that helped introduce the new sanctions. He was the guy who was pushing for military action against Iran. So if this is the person that's leading the transition team in the State Department, you can imagine that they'll be selecting a bunch of neocon psychos from the think tank world to staff all the key positions when it comes to the Middle East.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. However, we should also keep in mind that Blinken was Netanyahu's lawyer, and that the State Department under Biden was as evil and sinister as it can be. So it's not as if Trump or Trump's neocon allies have something in their sleeve that they can pull out that the Biden regime hadn't tried before. The fact is that time is not on the side of the United States. The world is changing very fast. The world despises the Israeli regime. And the more the United States continues to support the genocidal airstrikes being carried out against families across Lebanon and the Holocaust in Gaza, the more the United States will be isolated across the world, especially since Trump is disliked across the world more than other US leaders for whatever reason. So Trump has this major issue to deal with. On the other hand, China is not going to go away, and Russian demands in Ukraine are not going to go away. It's not as if Trump is going to be able to find an easy solution for his other problems. The problems in Ukraine will probably increase because if Trump capitulates to Russian demands, then he will be humiliated inside the United States. And if he does not capitulate, then the war will continue and things will get worse for the US and its allies. So the United States is in a very difficult situation. And we know that Trump opponents are going to go after him in the United States. The deep state is going to go after him. He has a lot of problems. And if he wants to intensify conflict with Iran, Iran is more prepared than it has ever been before. And Iran's allies in the region are much more prepared than ever before, whether it's in Iraq in particular or in Yemen.
I do want to ask about Iranian President Pezeshkian, because he was elected earlier this year on the promise to ease relations with the West and to get some of the sanctions imposed against Iran removed. You know, now that Trump is coming back, is this line of foreign policy thinking basically dead in Iran? Or are there some people still in the foreign policy establishment who are maybe hoping that dialogue with Trump is possible?
I think it's important to rephrase that and say that President Pezeshkian promised to do what is possible to ease tensions and thus to ease the sanctions. He didn't promise to do anything impossible or to do anything that would hurt Iranian sovereignty. And that is the same with President Raisi during his term before he died tragically. He also made the same promises. But I think ordinary Iranians have clearly seen that the problem does not lie in Tehran. Whether it's President Raisi or President Pezeshkian, the behavior of the West has always been irrational. Their genocidal attacks on Gaza and on Lebanon have shown Iranians the true nature of these so-called liberal democracies. And Trump has a particular place among Iranians. There's a unique dislike for him because of the murder of General Soleimani. And therefore, what his presence does is that it unites Iranians even further. So while the United States under Biden and under Trump will continue to attempt to create division in Iran, instability, to support terrorist organizations, in general, because of what we've seen in Gaza and Lebanon, and now because of the presence of Trump, ordinary Iranians are more united than before. And I think that will make it much more difficult for the United States to try to engage in some sort of conflict with Iran, because ordinary Iranians see the United States as a force that is both brutal and barbaric, but also as an entity that doesn't understand logic or reason.
And so, for my final question, I want to try and tie everything we've discussed together. So we've basically established that Trump is a continuity of both Biden and Obama. We've also established that really the geopolitical context has dramatically changed in the 4 years since Trump was president. Given all of that, how do you expect Iran to navigate the Trump presidency? What sort of foreign policy strategy do you expect it to take?
Everything will depend on Trump. If Trump behaves more reasonably than Biden, then that will be noted in Tehran. If he ends the Holocaust and genocide, that will, of course, be very important for our region. But if he thinks that by intensifying conflict in order to help Netanyahu continue with the Holocaust, if he thinks by doing that he can gain concessions from Iran or he can gain the upper hand, then he is badly mistaken. The axis of resistance is much more powerful today than it has ever been before. And the United States is extremely vulnerable. No one in this region, except for Netanyahu and his people, wants a regional war. That would be catastrophic for the world. But the choice is going to be made in Washington. Either Trump can make or take steps in the right direction to make things better for ordinary Americans, because I don't think he really cares about people across the world. Or he makes the wrong decision and brings about increased suffering across the world, including for ordinary Americans. And I think that overwhelmingly his supporters will never forgive him for that. Christian Zionists and Jewish Zionists and secular Zionists do not form the majority of those who voted for him. The majority voted for him because of their dislike for the Democrats and because their lives have become much more difficult over the past couple of decades. And I think he probably recognizes that.
Professor Marandi, thank you so much for joining the program. And to our listeners and viewers, thank you for tuning into our very first episode of the multipolar mini-series about Trump's return to power. If you like this episode, please like it and share it. It really helps get the message out there.